So we've heard so much about queens and kings, from kings and princes and princesses in the last week or so. Let's zoom into what the Torah and our other sources have got to say about the concept of kingship, of monarchy, from the biblical text and all the way to Kabbalistic texts that we're going to be looking at in a moment. So the question is a king or a queen, compatible with our values? And I'm going to refer you to, and now, I'm going to select the screen before you can see it, and now you should be seeing it. This is the 9th chapter of the first book of Samuel, and discusses the appointment of the first king. And here, we're getting some mixed messages. Sorry, I'm not sure. Was that screen showing with the text? Great, let's go right back to it then. So it's the end of Samuel's life, and he's appointed his sons to judge, but it's not going well. They're not following his ways, and whatever. We won't discuss where the breakdown was, why he appointed them, and what got to their head, whatever it is. But this is what happens next. The elders approach Shmuel and say, we want a king. Your kids are not doing a good job. We want a king. And I emphasize, they say, to judge us, kechol hagoyim, like all the people. So appoint a king to govern us like all other nations have got kings. And Samuel is not happy. And he davens to Hashem. And he says, look, what's this all about? And Hashem says, look, don't take it to heart. It's not you, it's them. And they've been doing this to me. This has been going on for centuries, from Egypt until now. They worship idols, they forsake me, and now they're doing this to you. Don't get upset, don't take it to heart. It's not you, but it would seem clearly that Hashem is not approving of this appointment, just as Shmuel is upset, so is Hashem. But he said, go ahead, listen to them, but before you make this appointment of a king, warn them about what it means to have a king. And King Samuel spells out what Hashem has said, and it would seem it's not his own story. This is the prophecy that he's sharing with them about the fact that the king can draft people into the army or even into his service, in a more civil manner, that he can take daughters to work for him in the palace, that he can appropriate anything, that he can take tithes, which he's going to use to support his staff and so forth. He's really trying to dissuade them. He's really trying to dissuade them from the appointment of a king. And in the end, in verse 18 there, and the day will come when you cry out to Hashem, because of the king you yourself have chosen, and Hashem will not answer you on that day. You've been warned. Now you have a king. So you would think that's kind of going to dissuade them. It doesn't. The people don't listen to him. They say, we must have a king over us. We want to be like all the other nations. A king has to rule over us. He has to take us out to battle, and so forth. And so a king is appointed. Shmuel hears what the people says. He reports it to Hashem, and Hashem says, go appoint a king over them. And that is where chapter 10 begins with King Saul, where he is, where he wasn't king yet, and Samuel looking, appointing him, and the appointment of the king. It would seem from that selection I just read to you from that 8th chapter of 1 Samuel, that clearly it's wrong, and it was kind of Hashem pandering to a request made by the Jewish people, but it's clearly isn't what was intended, which becomes very complicated. You may recall that just 2 weeks ago in Shul, we read about the appointment of the king as a mitzvah. It's one of the positive commandments in the Torah. In fact, if you look in Rambam, he's got an entire book at the very end of his laws. It's called Hilchot Melachim, Melchamotem, the laws of kings and their wars. And it begins, there's a mitzvah to appoint the king of its one of the 613 commandments. And let's look at that text and maybe get some clues into, why, when it comes to it, Hashem is all upset and the prophet's all upset, but here's a commandment. So in the portion of Kitavo, which we read, as I said, well, portion is Kiteitzei. This particular selection begins with the words Kitavo. So you enter the land, and you take possession of it, and you decide, I want to set a king over me, as do all the nations about me. So that's kind of almost the words that the Jews used when they asked for the king. But this is what is the mitzvah. Appoint a king over yourself, but one chosen by your God, and make sure to set a king over yourself that is one of your own people. You may not set a foreigner over you who is not your own king. There was this, there is this, monarchy is kind of on its way out, but there was always this concept that kings have blue blood, that kings have to belong to a particular family, and very often nations appointed foreigners over themselves because they had to have a king, and there wasn't a royal dynasty within their their own people. I mean, I know from having studied history of the country when I was in school, which was Belgium, and that was a contrived country. I mean, it was made up of a piece of Belgium, a piece of the Netherlands, a piece of Germany, and then who do you appoint as a king? Well, you go to the Habsburg, I think Austrian dynasty, and you pick a king and you stick him in there, and a couple of or a century or so later, you have World War II, and the Nazis occupying, the German army occupying, and the king has got some very complicated split loyalties because he's not really Belgian, because there actually isn't such a thing as a Belgium. There isn't such a nationality. Obviously, it developed with time, but clearly, at inception, it did not exist. So the idea that you go and appoint a king that belongs to the royal family, but is not one of you. No, you got to appoint one of us, and that's a very important concept that is set straight in this mitzvah. So you can, but it's one of you, and look at what is being restricted, not to have large cavalries and not to have many wives, and not to amass money. We're talking about a totally different standard, moral standard for this king and what's expected of him. And finally, a mitzvah for the king to write a Torah. We each have a mitzvah to write a Torah, to own a Torah, or to share a Torah at the very least. That's the 613th commandment, the final commandment. We're going to read it in the parsha in 2 weeks' time. At that Kitulach, the portion of Ha'azino, you need to write yourself a Torah. But the king has to have an extra Torah, and that one he has to carry with him at all times. Wherever he goes around. It's actually called, they translated a copy of the teaching of the Torah. It's Mishneh HaTorah, a second Torah, a double Torah. And he has to have it with him wherever he goes. He carries it with him. So that with a miniature Torah, which could be carried kind of, on a strap over his shoulder. And that is going to remain with him so that he can read it all his life, learn to revere Hashem, to observe faithfully every word of the teaching as well as these rules. So that's the kind of king. And when the Jews in the days of Samuel asked for a king, it wasn't exactly that. And that's where, there was upset. And that's where there's an attempt to dissuade them and to make them come back into what is actually true kingship. So the answer to the question, is kingship, is monarchy part of, is it Jewish? Yes, it's Jewish. Is it the same kind of monarchy as what the nations out there have? Well, no. And I think the restriction placed on the king, the fact that it has to be one of us, and the fact that he has to keep a Torah with him at all times, puts that into the right perspective in terms of what a king really is. So probably 10, 12 years ago, maybe more, I ended up in Bangkok airport. I was flying to California, but it turned out to be the best, the cheapest, and the most convenient route. So I went to Los Angeles via Thailand. It only added a couple of hours of flying, and I spent a day in Bangkok. But part of that day in Bangkok, I think on the way, was waiting at the airport for my connecting flight, and I was in the Thai Airways business class lounge, to which I was fortunate to have access. And it was time for Ma'ariv. So I was in the lounge and I approached the staff and I pointed to a room that seemed to be very private, and I asked if I could. It was a very fancy room, I must say. It asked if there was any way they could unlock that room just for a few minutes, because I wanted to do my own thing there. And they kind of smiled at each other, looked at each other, and then the one said, no, this is the private room for the king of Thailand. When he travels, this is where he waits for his flights. I said, okay, but he's not here at the moment, and I actually have an appointment with his king. And it took them a few seconds. They clicked and said, no. We'll find you a private place to pray if you want to, but we cannot open this room because that would cost us our jobs, if not more. So Hashem is referred to as the King of Kings, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, Hakadosh Baruch Hu, and those words probably appear in many places, but you're probably familiar with them from the prayer of Aleinu. Sorry, that's the end of the section I should have shown you before, that the king following all of these mitzvot will have long reign. This is the prayer Aleinu, and we speak about Hashem there, and the difference between others who don't believe in God. V'anachnu korim mishtachavim umodim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim. We bow, prostrate ourselves, and offer thanks before the supreme King of Kings. So Hashem is the Melech Malchei Hamlachim. So it's acknowledged that there are kings, but then there's a supreme king, and he is a king over all kings in that sense. So in many places that expression, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, which is king over kings. So, there's an acknowledgement, not just about the role of a Jew king in Judaism, but about kings of nations, and the fact that they acknowledge as kings, but Hashem, of course, is the supreme king. And that theme of kingship comes up quite a bit this time of year, beginning with our shiur from last week or 2 weeks ago, I think. Forget now, when we developed the theme of Melech Basadeh, or the king in the field. So we refer to Hashem, who is actually the king, and we talked about his accessibility as the fact that he is out there in the field. For all those of you who kind of look around the field and don't see the king, I want to share this with you. it's gone viral, so you may have seen it before. My apologies for the.
And then I was lucky enough to spend the last 14 years of my career as the Queen's personal protection officer, a position called the Queen's police officer, until I retired.
About her wit and charm. How did you find her?
Oh, I would give you 101 examples of her wit and her charm. And would you like some?
Yes, please. Oh, yes, please.
Go for it.
Yeah, well.
1 o'clock.
Okay. But one of my favourite stories is when we were at Balmoral, and the Queen used to go up there in May to Craiggowan House and just stay there privately for a weekend. And she would go out at lunchtime for picnics, and very often it would just be the police officer and Her Majesty. And one of the picnics I went out with her, we had a lovely picnic and a lovely chat, and then we went for a little walk, just the two of us. And normally on these picnic sites, you meet nobody, but there was two hikers coming towards us, and the Queen would always stop and say hello. And it was two Americans on a walking holiday. And it was clear from the moment that we first stopped, they hadn't recognised the Queen, which is fine. And the American gentleman was telling the Queen where he came from, where they were going to next, and where they'd been to in Britain. And I could see it coming, and sure enough, he said to Her Majesty, "And where do you live?"
Sorry, I'm not sure the sound's coming through, so let me just redo this. It looks like it does. So we continue.
And she said, "Well, I live in London, but I've got a holiday home just the other side of the hills." And he said, "Well, how often have you been coming up here?" "Oh," she said, "I've been coming up here ever since I was a little girl, so over 80 years. And you could see the clogs thinking. He said, "Well, if you've been coming up here for 80 years, you must have met the Queen."
I love
And as
it.
quick as a flash says, "Well, I haven't, but Dick here meets her regularly." So the guy said to me, "Oh, you've met the Queen, what's she like?" And because I was with her a long time and I knew I could pull her leg, I said, "Oh, she can be very cantankerous at times, but she's got a lovely sense of humour." Anyway, the next thing I knew, this guy comes around, puts his arm around my shoulder, and before I could see what was happening, he gets his camera, gives it to the Queen, and says, "Can you take a picture of the two of us?" Anyway, we swapped places, and I took a picture of them with the Queen, and we never let on, and we waved goodbye. And then Her Majesty said to me, "I'd love to be a fly on the wall when he shows those photographs to the friends in America, and hopefully someone tells him who I am."
Oh, that's brilliant.
My apologies for the Spanish subtitles in the middle. Brilliant story. Yes, the king is in the field. Got to open up your eyes and recognize him. That's quite important. So it's a big theme of this time of year. But there are other ways in which kingship comes up as a relevant theme this time of year. So, Avinu Malkeinu, famous prayer. Chanenu Vanenu. What is Avinu Malkeinu? Our Father, our King. It's not translated here. Avinu Malkeinu is just one of many Avinu Malkeinu. It's a prayer that we invoke this time of year, in particular, because this is the time when that attribute of kingship is more evident than at other times. Probably most relevant is this little change we make in the Amidah during the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur inclusive. It's in the third blessing of the Amidah. It's a blessing called Kedusha, Kadosh, from holy, you're holy, your name is holy. And the blessing normally ends with Hakela Kadosh, or you are blessed, the Almighty, Holy One, the Holy God. But during the 10 days of penitence, there's a slight change. And instead of saying Hakela Kadosh, we now say Hamelech HaKadosh, which is the Holy King. So that gives us the sense that this attribute of kingship of Hashem is more evident and powerful during this period. In the Amidah of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, so there we have the end of the bracha, the main bracha, the central bracha of the Amidah. We bless Hashem. We refer to him as Melech al Kol Haaretz, Mekadesh Yisrael Yom HaZikaron. So he is a king of the entire world who sanctifies Shabbos and the holy day. So that gives us a bit of a sense that this time of year, there's something about kingship, and we need to kind of scratch beneath the surface of what that is to get a better understanding of what kingship here is all about. But essentially, Rosh Hashanah is the idea of the coronation of the king, the crowning of the King of Kings. I don't know when the new King of England is going to be crowned, but Hashem is being crowned year after year on Rosh Hashanah. By whom? By us, his subjects. And the idea of blowing shofar on Rosh Hashanah is actually to the trumpets that are blown at a coronation. What you're looking at here is a page of the Talmud Brachot, or paragraph of the Talmud Brachot, that discusses blessings that should be said on various occasions. If you meet wise men, then you would make the bracha Shechalak Mechochmato Liyireav. Hashem shared His wisdom with those who revere Him. That would be if it's a Jewish person who is a believer. Otherwise, it would be He shared His wisdom with flesh and blood. If one sees kings, then for Jewish king, He shared his glory with those who fear Him, those who revere Him. And if it's a Gentile king, then the bracha Shenatan Mikvodo Levasar V'dam. He shares of His glory, is given of His glory to flesh and blood. So that's actually the bracha that's recited when we find ourselves in the presence of a monarch. There's great debate whether, for example, for the Queen of England or now the King of England, you'd be able to make this bracha, because a king today is not the ultimate monarch with absolute total power over his subjects, the way it would have been when that passage of Talmud was written, and even kings of England some century ago or more. Many monarchs had that absolute and total power. We only have to go back to 1917 when the Tsar of Russia was overthrown. And those were absolute despotic rulers with total powers over their subject in every single way, life and death. So there's always been a debate whether one can really make that bracha, over the Queen of England, or many people, of course, will have the opportunity of attending the various pageants and things that are happening in London, and see the king, and can that bracha be made there, being that they're not absolute and total monarchs, but no question that they represent monarchy to the best that we know. The concept of a king is used extensively as a parable, not just in examples I gave you earlier, but in mystical writings, to explain the relationship of Hashem with His subjects, us with God, and particularly, how the divine interacts with the physical down here. I mean, there's such not just polar opposites, because they're completely different realms of spirituality versus physicality, and how that works. And so in mystical writings of Chassidut and Kabbalah, the concept of a king to explain the power of God is used extensively. In fact, Chassidim cried when the Tsar was deposed and a year later killed. They didn't cry tears of sadness because this cruel tyrant had now been thrown off his throne. They cried that how would they be able to explain to students the concept of kingship when the absolute model of kingship had kind of left the world. So the closest we have, when I studied these writings, and I was born well after 1917, obviously, you always imagined, Queen of England as being that model of majesty, of kind of being loved and feared by subject at the same time. So what is this concept of kingship in Hashem? In Kabbalah, we learn of the 10 Sfirot. You've probably heard about them quite a bit, because we refer to them in many ways. And here they are. Okay, Chochma, Bina, and Da'at. And that you can see spelled CBD, but that's not an oil to be taken when you have various pains. It's actually in Hebrew, Chet, Bet, and Dal, or Chabad, and that refers to the cognitive attributes of Hashem. We then have 6 more attributes referred to as Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferet. Always go right, left, and middle. So that's loving kindness, judgment, and harmony, which refer more to the emotional realm, expression of Hashem. And we then have Netzach, Chod, and Yesod, which relate more to how that comes into action. All of these, top 9 one, I'm starting over here, they all remain theoretical. What links it to the recipient of Hashem's emanations, because they're all divine emanations? What takes it to a next level down into a practical world is that last sephira, that last attribute, divine attribute of malchut, or kingship. Let me take you a little bit more into digging into Kabbalah. So you can see here, there's actually an 11th called Keter, crown. That interchanges. Either you have the 10 sefirot starting without the top one, or you remove that and you include Keter. So either Keter is a level above or below. But Kabbalah is very into the concept that the beginning and the end are interlinked. We say this in the Chadodi. Sof ma'aseh machshavat chila, the final action, the bottom line is there in the words of Kabbalah. Na'ut tchilatam besofan, the beginning and the end are always kind of interwoven and connected. And you can see clearly the crown above, which signifies the emanations of Hashem from above, and bringing it down to the lower level, but with a direct line connection between kingship and that. In terms of various faculties, human faculties that relate to these sefirot, kingship or malchut relates to the attribute of speech. How did God create the world? The creation of the world happened through the speech of God, so to speak, the Asara Mamarot, the 10 utterances. So one can spend a lot of time talking about the Sefirah of Malchut and dedicate the whole shiur to that, but it's a very powerful attribute because it's the one that gives rise to a physical world from a spiritual world, and through the power of Malchut, of course, emanating via all of the 9 Sefirot, all the 9 attributes, divine attributes that are above that. And finally, there is one more dimension of kingship that should be mentioned. And we're familiar with the idea that we're waiting for a messianic era. We're waiting for Mashiach. What does Mashiach really mean? Mashiach means the anointed one. And the correct full name for Mashiach is HaMelech HaMashiach, or the king, the anointed one, the king Messiah. So we're actually looking forward to an era when the world will be different. And one of the changes will be that there will be a restoration of divine monarchy. We say in the Amid, Tzemach David Avdach Amer Tatzmiach, may the sign of David come about and rule over us again. So we're praying for restoration of monarchy, because then the kingdom of earth will truly reflect the kingdom of heaven. And of course, that's what we're praying for every day of our lives. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Rabbi.